What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, June 3rd, and I'm live taking your questions on YouTube. So welcome in, guys. Drop them in the chat. We're going to go probably about like 30, 45 minutes because it is the first game of the NBA Finals. And I am very excited for that. Very excited for Charles Barkley and San Antonio and lots of funny comments. So I am going to be sat for this and very excited. And I've got it on literally right here so I can make sure that I don't run us too far past because these tip-offs are always like, trying to time them is crazy. So we will get off in time enough for everybody to go enjoy the game. And we'll go ahead and get started because we got a lot to cover. Good God, they hit us with NFL news this week. So, and welcome into the chat. I see you guys in the chat already there. Shout out to Sony Pat getting in there. Ooh, super early today. Said, I went to WSU and drafted Kyle Williams last season in Dynasty. Second, thanks, Eagles. A-holes. Yeah, that sucks. Sucks for everybody. I heard Kayshon Boutte is potentially looking for, I glanced at that, so I don't know if that was like a legitimate rumor or a verified source or anything. I just literally saw the notification out of the corner of my eye, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So Kayshon Boutte not happy. I hate to break it to you, buddy. I mean, he had a great year. Excellent connection. Great. Great is as great as it could be, right? Excellent connection with Drake May. Was a strong red zone target. I don't know if looking for another location is the right way for you to go, buddy. Might need to sit there. Unfortunately, it's so crowded. It's just, Romeo Doubs, wide receiver 1 for about 2 months there. So AJ Brown, it'll be very interesting to see how this works out because of all the rumors, right? I guess let's go ahead and dive in here, right? So let's see. And also, so we'll dive in on AJ Brown here. But also, as I was going through the chat, shout out to Big Noggin in there as well. Shout out to Steve the King. So I will get to the comments there in just a second, but let's go ahead and talk about AJ Brown on the subject there. Nice comment there to get us tipped off here. The AJ Brown trade and what it means for fantasy football. The most interesting part of all of there's so many rumors that have come out about this in terms of rumors as to why and the timelines being added up as to why AJ Brown requested the trade and that the trade request might have happened back in late September of last year, which means that, they were doing well from a team perspective at that point. So it couldn't have been related to the team, coming off a Super Bowl and starting off the season strong. So it's been fun reading the rumors. But the one that is very critical for us from a fantasy perspective is the rumors that the Rams were in it, but they were concerned about the medicals for AJ Brown. And it's not just rumors. We've heard that the Patriots know they're okay with it. It doesn't bother them. They understand there is apparently a degenerative knee issue going on here with AJ Brown, and he is winding down right towards the end of his career. He's still in the prime days, right? But of course, from a fantasy perspective, we know that his age is creeping on up there to the point where we're starting to think like, okay, the end is near at some point in a few years. Is it going to become an issue sooner because of the knee issue? But regardless, talking about AJ Brown in the short term, from a dynasty perspective, it's rough, right? Because all of these rumors coming out, maybe you can try and sell him high because now he is in an offense for, with Drake May. And for our perspective, there's a very high ceiling in this offense for him. So if you want to trade him off and maybe, sell high and miss out on the potential gold mine that we could have here for him in New England, now would be a good time to try and get out of it, right? But from a redraft perspective and looking at what he will do specifically in 2026, when I look at the Patriots and the way that their offense operated last year, we know two things, right? One, the regular season was a factual cupcake schedule, right? And two, we know that because it was a cup, and maybe that was the issue. There could have been a wide variety of things, but because it was, and let me phrase that as not an issue, but because of the fact that perhaps there was a cupcake schedule, they did not have to do so much on offense from a pass perspective. Drake May was not a very aggressive, and I should have pulled up the stats here. Actually, I might have them up here for you guys, but Drake May was not throwing a ton of attempts there. The Patriots were, let's see here, the Patriots were 23rd in pass attempts last season, despite the fact that they were 4th in total passing yards. So 23rd in pass attempts, 4th in passing yards, 31 touchdowns, passing touchdowns. That would make them 6th in the league. Obviously, interceptions were not a remote problem for Drake May, only 8 on the season. That is excellent work there for him. Second to last, right? Second best in terms of the least interceptions thrown by a team for the season last year. So from that perspective, if you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, I know that they were incredibly efficient last year. Drake May was completing passes at an incredible clip. Is that going to carry over into 2026? That's the big question. And I think it should come down. There should be some natural regression there that brings them down a little bit. But at the end of the day, we know there is a solid, easy 100 more attempts that could be managed in this offense. So volume is there. And for what it's worth, Stephon Diggs, from a fantasy perspective, he was okay, but he didn't really have massive upside, right? But the targets were there for him as well as the quasi wide receiver one. He was the wide receiver one, getting around, 100 or so targets, and theoretically a higher ceiling with potentially more pass volume this year. So the targets are there, the quarterback is there, and perhaps the harder schedule will benefit as well because they're not going to be able to operate off of this efficiency. They're going to have to go band for band on their schedule, right? It's going to be difficult. They're going to have to throw the ball more. And it'll come with, again, a little bit of a decrease in efficiency, but more attempts, more yardage, and more benefits for A.J. Brown. And when we look at A.J. Brown, obviously his frustrations with the lack of volume last year were legitimate, right? But prior to that, even with Jalen Hurts, and this is where I kind of like defend Jalen a little bit there, because aside from last year, there was really not a major issue with getting volume to A.J. Brown. The man was pacing well for 1,400 yards pretty regularly outside of that last season. So perhaps we get A.J. back to where he was in terms of looking at him for double-digit touchdowns, potentially 1,400 to 1,500 yards, plenty of receptions. And it's very interesting from a fantasy perspective because I was looking at my rankings today. And let me pull up the consensus rankings in particular so we can look at those because I'm kind of right on consensus with A.J. Brown as well. A.J. Brown right now in consensus, he has moved up like a tiny bit, I believe. I think he was like around wide receiver 13. But yeah, he was like wide receiver 13, I think, prior to all of the other news that came out regarding obviously Rashee Rice the past couple of weeks there. And then Malik Nabers' recovery not maybe being as awesome as we were hoping it would be. Actually, since we're going to talk news, I am going to pull up these graphics here so we can do a rundown of the news that I'm going to cover here. But when we're looking at A.J. Brown and the rankings, he's moved ahead of those guys. So he's at wide receiver 11 right now. So obviously we got, tier 1 guys, Jamar, Puka, JSN. Then your tier 2 guys, Amon-Ra, CD, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Nico Collins. Then tier 3 goes to George Pickens, Chris Olave, and then A.J. Brown. I think it's a very interesting spot for A.J. Brown because while we know there is a knee issue, that's more of a long-term thing, not something that we're thinking is going to be a major effect on him in 2026, right? Just an ongoing issue that you have to be aware of with him. Perhaps a little bit of a dip in a step, but really at the end of the day, he's still, for the most part, A.J. Brown, right? So when I'm looking at that list of receivers, right, and we've talked about this before, we talked about rankings. The top 4 are my nice little comfort level, right? Jamar, Puka, JSN, and Amon-Ra. Obviously, Puka has to make it through the season without doing anything else that is stupid. But provided he makes it to the season, right? Those are my clear top 4. I've got zero problem with them from a performance perspective. I trust their production. I know they're going to put up volume there and it's going to be steady, right? And then after that, you go to a range of guys who unfortunately just have question marks, right? CeeDee Lamb in himself, very, very talented. I know that he has overall wide receiver 1 upside, but George Pickens is more than likely going to be playing this season with him. And considering what we saw last season, I think we kind of broke down the numbers last week, or maybe we did. I think I might have broken it down maybe in an individual video on my YouTube channel. But really, oh, no. It was a show I did with Fantasy Bros. So the problem with CeeDee Lamb here in his ranking is that he's a wide receiver 1, but alongside George Pickens, even if George Pickens is a little bit lackadaisical, right? Frustrated with the franchise tag. Maybe he's, brain is a little bit off at portions of the season, right? Because he didn't get that contract. His presence is still there. So really, we're looking at CeeDee Lamb in the wide receiver 8 to 12 range. I'm so sorry if you guys hear a dog barking. My dog is losing it. There's clearly someone in front of the house right now, probably doing a delivery or something like Amazon delivery. So it's distracting me a little bit there. But when we're looking at CeeDee Lamb, the upside that he has really is like the wide receiver 8 to 12 range, as long as George Pickens is there. Pickens' presence, unfortunately, caps him from ultimately being able to get to that top five range where we feel super comfortable with him. So by no means is he going to be a bust, but the odds of him paying off for where you draft him, if you're drafting him at wide receiver 5, that's a major issue. Then you get to Justin Jefferson. We'll talk about him in a little bit. I have a mailbag topic for him. Justin Jefferson, the quarterback issues. Drake London, quarterback issues. Big contract. Congrats to Drake London on that one. And good on Atlanta for locking in contracts. That's one thing I will say is like a side note. I just don't know why these teams don't always lock in their wide receiver contracts early. You're signing him. You know that he's going to be your franchise wide receiver 1. Just get it done early before, the earlier you get it done, the more deals that you have, right, in terms of long-term value. But regardless, anyway. But Drake London, quarterback issues. Nico Collins, I won't say quarterback issue because I don't want to do that to CJ Stroud, but offensive line issue that causes a quarterback issue, right? Chris Olave, new blood, obviously, in there with Jordan Tyson. And then we already talked about George Pickens. So it's kind of like a weird area where all of those guys have reasons where I could logically just X them off of the list and say, I don't want to draft him. I don't want to draft him. I don't want to draft him. Now, obviously, I will be drafting some of those guys, right? But you don't feel the same level of comfort that you do with an Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has been proven to be the overall wide receiver 3 year after year after year. The volume of guys like Jefferson, Puka, and JSN, you just don't have that level of comfort for the guys that are in that range now. Now I'm looking at A.J. Brown on a new team, quarterback, fantastic situation, right? And we're anticipating more volume for him as the Patriots will have to handle more, push more volume with this increased difficult schedule, right? So I'm looking at A.J. Brown at wide receiver 11, and I'm like, I low-key kind of like that. Even if you look at the guys after him, Malik Nabers, injury issue, Rashee Rice, criminal issue, Tedero McMillan, Bryce Young, volume issue. Like, yeah, A.J. Brown kind of is looking like maybe one of the safer picks in that range, honestly. So we knew it was coming in terms of the trade, but I don't know if we're going to see a massive leap for him in rankings. So oddly enough, I'm kind of excited about the potential increase in volume here. And I'm looking at A.J. Brown a lot, and I'm kind of buying into it for real. But again, from a dynasty perspective, it might be a good sell high situation here. Did want to talk about the Myles Garrett trade as well, because obviously it's not just an IDP thing. Defenses affect the way that we look at fantasy and our offensive players that we are putting into our lineups. And the real key thing there is that one, first of all, side note, everyone talked about the lopsidedness of this trade. Obviously, it was a great trade for the Rams to get Myles Garrett, right? But Jared Verse is not a scrub, right? So it's not as if Cleveland did not get anything in return. Obviously, he's not Myles Garrett. Will he ever be Myles Garrett? Probably not. But he's a great player. And so getting that in the draft capital as well, this was a logical move for Cleveland because realistically, Myles Garrett is just sitting on their roster, right? Now they've been able to get some good return for him and figure out how to move forward and hopefully build around the players that they do have and build around their defense, which is still very good with Jared Verse, right? So their defense gets a little bit of a downtick, right? Because it's Myles Garrett, but it's not a big gaping hole, right? There's a player that's going to fill it, and he's been very successful. The Rams D-line was not an issue last year. It was their secondary that consistently was the problem with them. So when you're looking at this, they upgraded their defensive line, right? That was already very strong, the Rams. And they solved their secondary issue by making additions to the secondary as well. The Rams defense was a formidable defense before, but it was a defense where from a fantasy perspective, I was never afraid of my players facing them, particularly the quarterbacks and the receivers, because while the Rams were going to force sacks and force turnovers, right? Interceptions. At the end of the day, your quarterback was going to probably throw for aggressive volume on that defense because they are trying to keep up with, let me mute. Unfortunately, I'm getting text messages there. They're trying to keep up with that Rams offense, right? So defensively, this just puts them on another level. From a fantasy perspective, drafting defenses, it makes them very appealing for an uptick in usability in our fantasy lineups as a DST. And then again, we're going to have to adjust those strength of schedules because this obviously does take them to another level. So teams they're facing, the Rams, we're going to be having to fortunately look and reevaluate differently than we looked at them last year, right? Then looking at what this does for the offense as well, defense going on a higher level, again, we're still going to see, I've seen a lot of things like this is great for, this is great for Kyren Williams and Blake Corum, right? Particularly Kyren Williams, right? Because we do need to acknowledge he is the RB1. It is a committee. You do need to come to terms with that Kyren and Blake Corum are acting in tandem. But it doesn't really mean that you have to fade either one of them because it's a highly effective usage for both of them because of how good that offense is. You can just get touchdowns on touchdowns, right? Plenty of opportunities for both of them there. And obviously, the defensive increase would potentially increase the upside of the running backs because if the Rams are up a lot towards the end of the game, there's no competition. The defense is stout. Perhaps the Rams can rely on their ground game a little bit more, but at the end of the day, Stafford is still going to throw regardless. So don't adjust those running backs too dramatically there. And then on the opposite end of that, I've seen a lot of fear that, oh my God, now this means that, it's Quinshon Judkins is just not going to be it this season. Look at look at Dylan Sampson as the sleeper. No, please don't do that. Again, do not underestimate Jared Verse. The defense is getting a downgrade there, but it's not that dramatic. They're still an overall strong and very young defense as well there. So don't overreact and suddenly think that this is going to be a team that is not going to be able to keep these games close and they're not going to be able to run the ball. Not the case. It's still a strong unit there. So main takeaway from this is do not overreact to the changes to the running backs, particularly with the Browns, right? The amount of fade Quinshon Judkins now is crazy, as if Jared Verse is just nothing. Like, let's not do this. And they had such young, promising talent last year that is going to make a leap as well. So this is still a really, really solid, good unit there. They just got to figure out that quarterback situation. And we can give no advice on that one because it is whatever they figure out. Jumping to the comments here real quick. And Big Noggin said, let me do this real quick because I like this comment. What's up, Tara? Just got home from work. Gonna cook up some bacon cheeseburgers while you cook up some delicious fantasy knowledge. Love it. I am after this going to cook. I would like a bacon cheeseburger. That would be amazing. Maybe you can send one my way. I think I am going to do a chicken sandwich, like a Chick-fil-A type of chicken sandwich that I'm going to make at home. Yeah. Because I don't like to eat before the show, so I'll eat after this. Let's see here. From Sick Nasty 1691, the Commanders need to snag another wide receiver one before AB before the season, please. That is a good comment there because there's a couple directions that we actually. I'm going to have a video that comes out. I think I'm scheduling it for Monday that talks about, I haven't decided if I'm talking about both, but it will talk about at least one of either Chigo Okonkwo or Antonio Williams there, because that is an excellent point here. This Commanders unit is very interesting for the fact that this offense with a healthy Jaden Daniels is a good offense, right? And when we're looking at this wide receiver core, it's Terry McLaurin and nobody else. And Terry McLaurin has topped out at around 130 targets, a little over 130 targets in a season a few times there. Could he handle in the, JSN level of target range? Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's not particularly his game, but I'm sure he could. But at the end of the day, I know Jaden Daniels is throwing the ball for more than 150 times. So where are these other targets going to be going to when we're looking at that receiving core? they have existing players on there that they tried to integrate, like a De'Ami Brown last year, right? A Luke McCaffrey or whatnot. But really and truly, I mean, the door is wide open for Antonio Williams to step up. Obviously, my Clemson brethren there. And he's an interesting prospect, right? Because last year was very underwhelming, but last year was underwhelming for the entire Clemson offense. So you can make a case that ignore what happened last year, just look at players for what they did the year before when the offense was operating at a higher level and more stable. And Antonio Williams is a promising prospect from that perspective. Can he step in there and be the wide receiver too? Logically, he does play well off of Terry McLaurin, so I like it as a good little pairing there. If he can handle some of that, slot type of work underneath kind of stuff, perhaps get a good little target share there would be a really good situation for him to work his way into. So it's possible, right? It is very possible that just by attrition of low competition that he could work his way into being the wide receiver 2 there and thrive. There's also the possibility that Chig Okonkwo steps up, because when you look at that Washington offense, obviously, I mean, they had Debo before. That didn't really work out. They had, before that, Jahan Dotson. Like, they've been trying to figure out this wide receiver 2 thing, and it just has not worked. But what has consistently been there over the past couple of years has been Zach Ertz. It has. And I know it doesn't feel like it, right? But if you're a sicko from a fantasy perspective, you were streaming Zach Ertz. I know I was, and they were good times, right? Especially in tight end agreement. They were good times with Zach Ertz there as a streaming option. He actually had more targets at Washington than Chig Okonkwo was seeing at Tennessee. So for as mediocre as the production has been for Chig, he will be stepping into an upgraded situation that naturally has given more volume to the tight end position. So, hey, take that volume, see what Zach Ertz did with it. It was usable. You're a younger, more athletic tight end at this point in your career. You can take that and you can actually get some yards after the catch and not fall to the ground. So it's possible. It is possible. It's a pipe dream, but it is very possible that Chig could be the one that steps up and has the most production as the secondary look behind Terry McLaurin there. And Chig, for what it's worth, he is checking in at tight end 20 in rankings with very favorable upside. So, it's something that we should look into, especially, because just from a strategy perspective, I've talked about it a little bit, but I don't think I've dove into it a ton on this podcast. From a strategy perspective, I am very much so top 7 tight end. That is and right now the rankings have flipped. I don't know why they have flipped this way, or maybe it's been this way and it's just my rankings that are different. But my top tight ends, let me pull up my rankings so physically I can see them and not read off of consensus and try to remember it off the top of my head. My top 7 rankings are Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Colston Loveland, Tucker Kraft, injury pending, obviously, his return to health, Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin Jr., and Kyle Pitts. And that is my cutoff right there. Those top 7 are the ones that I feel comfortable with clicking. And I mentioned in a video, Harold Fannin Jr. of that grouping is the one that I feel the most concerned about, right? Just because, again, he is switching to a new system. And if you want the breakdown on that, you can check out the video on my YouTube channel, Year 2 Fades video. But my only concern for him is that switching to Todd Monken, we actually don't have any evidence that Todd Monken runs a tight end heavy system, right? That was Baltimore's way in the personnel that they had. Mark Andrews existed before Todd Monken got there. They were a first look for Mark Andrews before that happened. And for everything that we have seen of Todd Monken in his time at Baltimore, and I do like him. I really like him as an offensive talent. So I've got optimism around him pushing this offense up, right, as much as they can with the quarterback situation. But Todd Monken appears like, if you're looking at it, it seems like he's been slowly trying to push Baltimore more towards a wide receiver first approach, right? But the problem is that, this beyond Zay Flowers, the talent just wasn't there. Rashad Bateman didn't work. They tried a wide variety of veterans that just did not work out, right? So he was working within the realm of what he had, and targeting the tight ends when you had Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely just made a ton of sense, right? The last time that Todd Monken was an offensive coordinator in the NFL was back in 2019 with Cleveland, ironically. David Njoku was on that team. He did not play the majority of the season. He was injured. Go figure. They were not a tight end heavy targeting team. They were not at all, right? And maybe it was personnel because Njoku was injured, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the way he wants to lead. And the fact that they added in 2 receivers in KC Concepcion and Denzel Boston, who we've been getting a lot of positive reports out of training camp. You always get positive reports out of training camp, right? But we are getting positive reports out of training camp, out of OTAs for them. So we're looking at it from that perspective. He is the one that worries me because everything else pretty much stays the same for everyone. And, some coaching changes, right, for Trey McBride and Brock Bowers. But at the end of the day, they're still the first look at those offenses. Harold Fannin Jr. is the only one that had coaching change and a lot of personnel added in. So he's the one red flag-ish, but he's still in my hey, if I end up with one of those 7, I'm good. I feel comfortable with that. Beyond that, I do not feel a level of comfort with Sam Laporta, Oronde Gadsden. I do feel good about Isaiah Likely, and Travis Kelce is just a pure volume guy for the price. It's fine. Jake Ferguson, Juwan Johnson, Dallas Goedert has Eli Stowers there lurking in the corner. Can't stand. I don't want to say can't stand Dalton Kincaid. Just have zero desire to draft Dalton Kincaid. So far back in my rankings that I'm trying to be kind, but really I would prefer to drop him to tight end 18 or something like that. But at the end of the day, there are better streaming options if you miss out on those top 7 that you can turn to. And Chig is one of those guys that I would absolutely take a chance with and feel comfortable leading that way with him and another option and streaming during the fantasy season and seeing if that would hit. That's the one. Chig is one that I feel very good about the potential for him as well. Shout out to Albert Moroccan in the comments there. How you doing? Shout out to Jerome Witherspoon, says great show. Thank you, Jerome. Really appreciate that. And then Stephen King in the comments says BTJ or AJ Brown. BTJ is a perfect. Do I have BTJ on? No, I don't have BTJ as one of the mailbag questions. BTJ is a really good topic for us to discuss right now, because obviously we have had some comments coming out about how, he's finally feeling healthy. And we do need to acknowledge that he was definitely playing through some stuff. Now, I'm not going to 100% excuse him playing through some injuries and stuff last year, because there were drops that had nothing to do with injuries. There were mental mistakes, like being well within the realm on the sideline of catching the ball, and you can easily get 2 feet down and you only get 1 in because you're just blinking, right? So there were a lot of things in terms of his production that were 100% his fault, not injury related. So I'm not going to 100% excuse the lack of production, because a lot of that was on him, right? But if he's saying he feels healthy, and sometimes you just got to trust players when they say, I wasn't feeling my best, I feel good now. And if I'm feeling my best heading into the season, feel very positive about the direction that it can head. But BTJ is still someone that I'm not raising up, even with the prospect of him being healthy, right? And I feel very good about Trevor Lawrence as well. I'm not aggressively raising him up in the rankings, even though I do like him for a theoretical bounce back. It's AJ Brown for me all day, every day in redraft. In Dynasty, I would still lean towards AJ Brown, because at the very least, even though we know that long-term there is some risk, right? We can still get good value for him, especially if this season goes exactly as I think it's going to go, in terms of there being plenty of volume and him being the clear wide receiver 1 there. So it's even in Dynasty, I would still lean towards AJ Brown on that one as well, but definitely in redraft. My problem with BTJ, right, is that even if I feel good about him as a talent, right, if I believe that he can get back to being that same level of talent that we saw in his rookie season, in particular the back half of the rookie season, that was amazing. The problem here is that when I look at the bodies, and I'm actually going to talk about Parker Washington in a video that I'm going to drop on Monday. The problem here is when I look at this receiving core of BTJ, Jacoby Myers, and Parker Washington, I can identify exactly how they're going to line up, right? And sorry. Oh, I have to include Travis Hunter. So sorry, Travis Hunter. I just kind of left you out there in the cold. For what it's worth, because we've had all of these rumors of Travis Hunter is only going to play defense, and then the Jags saying that's not true. We still see him as a dual threat player. I do think that logically, when you're looking up where he would be needed the most, more than likely, we're going to see more of him on defense with some very strategic use of him on offense, but not at a 70 plus snap rate, right? That's kind of my perspective on that. We'll have to see how it goes, right? And let it be known the Jags are not really the Jags are not really trustworthy when it comes to what you see from them in the offseason. Remember last year when they had everyone and their mother thinking that it was going to be Tank Bigsby to the moon because the man was taking first team reps and they trade him off into oblivion, right? So just be aware that's one of the teams where if you're looking at them in preseason and training camp and looking at who's getting first team reps and who's lined up where, just know that they low-key might be experimenting because that is just kind of the head coach that Liam Cohen is, and that it might not be an indication of who actually starts where, right? But if I'm looking at this team based off of last year, right, we have a very good sample size at the end of the season where we had full snaps, full play from Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, and Jacoby Myers, right, with no Travis Hunter. And the way that it lined up, right, was Jacoby on the outside, Brian Thomas Jr. on the outside, and Parker Washington was mainly in the slot, right? And that worked out very, very well from them offensively, right? It allowed them to be able to pivot off of some of that tougher coverage that Brian Thomas Jr. in particular was facing, right? And push a lot of volume towards Parker Washington because Liam Cohen is a very intelligent coach, right? And when he's, trying to figure out how to attack different defenses, I do think that it becomes less about him hyper targeting one guy like Seattle and JSN, right? And more so about being able to play matchups, right? And that's why we got games like the Jags against Denver, where the pass game thrived. Trevor Lawrence had a great game, and who had nearly 150 yards? It was Parker Washington, right? Because the tougher coverage was on Brian Thomas Jr. So BTJ, I trust him to progress forward and recover and bounce back, right? But at the end of the day, they're 3 deep in that receiving core, and it is a little worrisome in terms of just how much volume is going to go to him when they have the ability to be so versatile with their offense. So that is my only concern there with BTJ. Bounce back, but just we need to hesitate there a little bit. A couple of injury stuff that I wanted to talk about real quick before we dive in on some mailbag questions. Malik Nabers injury recovery. Questions around it. And we can't really judge like how he was running at a little, celebrity all-star game. There's a video of him running to first base and it looks like he's hobbling. It's not a really good judgment call there, but at the end of the day, it's just a good reminder that we do not have a timeline that says he will be ready by week 1. Very unlikely, in my opinion, because I've talked about guys being on the field, right, that are coming off of these injuries, right? We've talked about the fact, I've got there on the notes, right? Daniel Jones is back. Patrick Mahomes is back. Quinshon Judkins is on the field. Who else is on the Cam Skywalker is not really on the field, right? But it seems like his timeline is a little bit more clear than Malik Nabers, right? But we have guys that are returning off of injuries. They're on the field participating at OTAs. And obviously, as everyone always says, we need to see them with pads for sure, right? But in terms of recovery timelines, it's critical that we see these guys coming off of these ACL injuries at practice right now with visible evidence that they are running, they are cutting, they're participating, right? They've still got progress that they need to make in terms of their recovery, right? And again, don't be shocked at some of these guys that are participating in OTAs, right? Don't start off training camp healthy. They start off on the pup. I talked about it last week. That's what happened with Breece Hall and his recovery from his ACL injury a couple years ago, right? Was on the field in OTAs, running, no issue, right? Cuts, everything looking good. Spends a couple of weeks on the pup to start off training camp, is activated, plays preseason, and he's good to go, has a fantastic season from a fantasy perspective, right? So Malik Nabers is a little bit worrisome, right? And for that reason, as much as I have talked about being anti-Jackson Dart because of the whole Matt Nagy issue and not trusting him from an offensive perspective, we're seeing a shift now in people coming down on rankings, which, I hate to see it, right? Because I actually want to be correct and be the outlier on this. And I don't like it when everyone then gets on my same page, right? From a selfish perspective. But now everyone is like, wait, maybe Jackson Dart might be too highly ranked. So it's coming down for him as well. He's moved down a couple of spots, mainly because one, the whole Matt Nagy issue. And then two, really, it's really because now they're looking at Malik Nabers and saying, wait, so why am I drafting Jackson Dart at like QB8 if he's not going to have a wide receiver one for at least 4 weeks in the first season, right? Assuming that he would start on the pop. That's when things start to get very concerning, right? Because that receiving core outside of Malik Nabers, again, which is why I like Isaiah Likely, is Darnell Mooney. God love him, but it's been a while. Last year looked rough. It's been a while. I know he's very talented, and I think he can be the true wide receiver 2 in this offense, but we got to see a little bit of progress, right? They drafted Malachi Fields. I'm not crazy about him as a prospect, just because, again, less of a separator, not a ton of speed. So not my ideal prospect from that standpoint. And then obviously you've got the existence of Darius Slayton, and they did sign Odell Beckham Jr., which that ain't it. Good for him, but odds of him being able to step up and handle a ton of volume, very slim, right? So if Malik Nabers is not healthy and ready, if Malik Nabers takes some time once he is on the field to get back to looking like Malik Nabers, I mean, you might be up the creek struggling, right? If you take Jackson Dart as your QB1 and you're starting him without Nabers from that perspective, because then you're relying on his legs and increased usage on the ground and then the legs. That's just an increased injury risk there for him as well. So the Malik Nabers recovery and paying attention to that one is literally extremely, extremely critical. We also think that the Giants are going to be run heavy, which makes sense, right? Because again, identity of the team may be shifting that direction because of the new coaching regime, right? So a lot of concern there. But good news is that Daniel Jones is cleared to practice. Patrick Mahomes cleared to practice. They are on the field participating in drills at OTAs. So that is fantastic because, again, Patrick Mahomes right now, the value that we are getting, if you want to take that leap, and I'm taking that leap, that he is going to be healthy to start the season and there will be no issue, we're getting a massive discount on literally Patrick Mahomes, right? My only issue with Patrick Mahomes previously when drafting him is that I never wanted to draft him at the egregious level of being able to have to draft him up there with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. That just was not worth it to me from a fantasy perspective once we started seeing that dip in pass volume. But at the value that we're getting for him now, yeah, sign me up for low-end QB1. It's not even a question right there. And then Daniel Jones as well. Now, granted, we did see positive improvement from the rookie last year, so perhaps they might not be 100% up a creek if Daniel Jones, weren't ready to play. But at the end of the day, we want to see Daniel Jones in there. That was what really unlocked that consistent deep threat for Alec Pierce. That was very critical. I mean, you saw the steep drop-off of success that we had from Tyler Warren and Josh Downs as well. So, and, Michael Pittman when he was there. This offense needs Daniel Jones. So him being out there off an Achilles this quickly, excellent. Especially because it was an Achilles injury for him as well. Just so to see him out there and so we can actually get a feel of how he looks, right? Because the player that I would be the most concerned about being affected by Daniel Jones' Achilles would be Alec Pierce, because, if perhaps it's difficult for you to get the ball off, maybe you're struggling in confidence in terms of pushing off of your Achilles, makes it maybe a little bit more difficult for you to get the ball downfield. So it would maybe affect Alec Pierce a little bit more. But we would still feel very good as long as Jones is on the field for our guy, Tyler Warren, and then for Josh Downs as well as a nice little discount sleeper there. Game's about to start here. So let's do a couple of mailbag questions here. One that I'm going to pull up here that I actually pulled from our show last week. It came in from somebody who watched the show later and then dropped this comment. I thought it was hilarious. I wanted to bring it up. Said, why do we keep giving Justin Jefferson a first round pass? Is he the fantasy wide receiver gatekeeper or something? I find that comment hilarious. That's a really, really good one there. I low key agree with you on that one there. I want to be optimistic that Kyler Murray is going to get into this system with Kevin O'Connell. And Kevin O'Connell is going to fix all his problems because that's what Kevin O'Connell does, right? And that we're not going to see the sketchy version of Kyler Murray that we saw in Arizona. Because while I can factually say that even the sketchy version of Kyler Murray is better than JJ McCarthy, like I can say that with a straight face, like give me the jacked up version of Kyler over JJ McCarthy any day of the week, right? But that still doesn't make me feel super comfortable with Justin Jefferson as we have it right now. A top 7 pick, right? A top 6 or 7 pick, right? That's uncomfortable, right? But unfortunately, as we talked about previously with the rankings, it's hard not to put him there because everybody in that range has all these quarterback issues, right? These question marks and injury stuff. So him being up in the wide receiver 6 range is just more of like a default. And I actually didn't look at consensus and make sure he's still at wide receiver 6 because he's my wide receiver 6. Yeah, he's still consensus wide receiver 6. It's a default. But you're right in terms of this weird perception that we can't get off of him being in that area because of the talent that we know he has, right? If we were to, but even then so, like if I don't see where I would ever feel comfortable drafting Nico Collins over Justin Jefferson. I don't see that because he also has the same issue of inconsistency at quarterback. Now, granted, his is more because of CJ Stroud and the offensive line and timing and whatnot, but still, we're given that default preference there to Jefferson because of the massive upside that he has shown in the past there. So it is funny, right? But at the end of the day, when I am drafting, I'm not clamoring to draft Justin Jefferson where he is. I'm not going to lie there. It's a default ranking because we know who he is, right? And there's potentially optimism of the quarterback change. But at the end of the day, it's not a comfortable pick here. So this user was 100% on point in terms of pointing that out, that Justin Jefferson keeps getting this pass, right? Despite the fact that we've got a lot of concerns there. And, and even then so, talking about Kyler Murray, the thing about him, and why I can already predict that when I'm doing my trade videos, I can almost guarantee that there will be some combination every single week of Minnesota players, right? Because at the end of the day, I've rostered Kyler Murray in enough dynasty to know across the years that even if the beginning portion of the Kyler Murray experience goes well, that man is never there for you in the fantasy playoffs. Not one time can you rely on him. So it's an incredibly frustrating situation of but it is Justin Jefferson. Surely he can get the ball accurately somewhat to Justin Jefferson more than we were seeing, unfortunately, there, J. McCarthy. So that one. And then let's do one more mailbag question before I go, because the game has started and there was already a 3. Jesus Christ, right off the bat there. Right off the bat here. Question. Think Emeka Egbuka could break out this season? This is one that I am also going to talk about in my upcoming video on Monday in detail, ironically. It is, I don't have any concerns around Emeka Egbuka. It's trying to figure out what these other roles are going to be for the other receivers in the offense. I do think Emeka Egbuka is going to have that breakout season because when I look at Emeka and my confidence that I feel in him based off of last season, I do believe that beginning portions of the season is the true identity of Emeka Egbuka, and I don't fault him for what happened at the end of the season. He fell off dramatically, right? But there's a difference between falling off because your offense fell off as a whole, right? And the difference between you fell off because somebody stole your spot, right? Those are two very different things. It wasn't as if there was another wide receiver that was stepping up. If it was that all of a sudden Tez Johnson was stepping up and just, having 80 yards and a touchdown and Emeka Egbuka was nowhere in sight, that would be highly concerning. But Baker Mayfield came down in a massive way last season, especially towards the back half of the season. And on top of that, we also had the issue of the offensive coordinator being a clear downgrade to what they had previously had in Liam Cohen and Dave Canales, unfortunately. So it was just a weird spot for them, and the entire offense from a pass perspective floundered, right? So my concerns about Emeka and his down year are different. Like let's compare it to Brian Thomas Jr. Actually, yeah. So you compare it to Brian Thomas Jr., right? And the fact that it would be concerning that we saw stronger performances out of a guy like Parker Washington compared to Brian Thomas Jr. You can make that comparison and say, hey, I'm a little bit concerned about BTJ because other guys stepped up, Jacoby Myers looked better than him, and so on and so forth, right? But I can't say that about Emeka. That was just the offensive situation as a whole, right? So yeah, I still feel very good about Emeka. The question marks that I have is who's going to step up with him, right? Because it can't just be the Emeka Egbuka show, not physically possible. At least one other player has to. And when we look at Chris Godwin, obviously, he's versatile. He can play anywhere, right? But he's been more successful in kind of the slot role there. And unfortunately, it's easy to forget that he's on up there in age, right? He's knocking on 30. It's been a long time, years now since we have seen him have a complete season healthy and performing at a peak level. I think the fall off is there, unfortunately. And it's possible that if he gets that deference earlier in the season as a veteran, right? But I think we might be at the point where you start to see the clear inability to make it through an entire season. And then you look at new wide receiver Ted Hurst. We've had comments directly from Tampa Bay that his role will be X receiver. Not necessarily that he will be the guaranteed starter X receiver, right? But that is the position that he would play. And it makes sense. He fits that perfectly to a T in terms of his type and abilities. So good chance when we're looking at that the starting lineup initially might be Emeka, Chris Godwin, and Ted Hurst. My question mark here is Jalen McMillan. Can Jalen McMillan, who has shown a lot of upside, particularly as a rookie, can he actually surpass Chris Godwin? And maybe once we get towards the back half of the season and maybe we see a fall off from Chris Godwin, we see an emergence of Jalen McMillan, who has looked fantastic in specifically relief of Chris Godwin. And the receiving core ends up being with Emeka Egbuka as the first look, Ted Hurst is a strong option, and then Jalen McMillan doing a lot of that high volume stuff over the middle in the slot. So that is kind of my viewpoint of the Tampa Bay receiving core, watching out for that this offseason. And at the end of the day, feeling very good about Emeka Egbuka. And then Easy E says, hey, Tara, just dropped by watching the NBA championship. Perfect, because that is what we are going to go do now. I'm going to close out the show 10 minutes early so we can go and watch game one of the finals here. But good show, people. I appreciate you tuning in here. Thank you so much for tuning into the Dear Miss Fantasy show, available on all podcast platforms. So if you could give me a subscription on that would be greatly appreciated. And then also a subscription on my YouTube channel, that would be wonderful. And then shout out to Player Profiler as well. If you're not subscribed to Player Profiler, that is a ton of great content, a lot of great dynasty content as well, and best ball content as well. A lot of best ball content on that channel too. If you're looking for that as well, drop down a subscription there. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Perhaps we'll have more dramatic trades or arrests. Brandon Ayuk, an arrest was issued. Arrest warrant was issued for him. That's low-key funny, but regardless, perhaps we'll have a drama-free week. I doubt it. We'll probably have a lot of big wild news to talk about next week. So I will see you guys next week at 8 p.m. same time, same place. Thank you all for tuning in. Go enjoy the finals. Have a good one, guys. Talk to you later.